Hey bestie, it's time for your next session of Real Talk Friend Therapy with your favorite big sister auntie queen, Daisha Veronica. Besties, oh my God, hi y'all. Oh my goodness, happy 2025. I know it's been chaotic and scary and confusing and a whole host of other stressful things, but I also hope that y'all are using this as the motivation to make space for habits and practices that will best support your self-care. Because we're gonna need it to get through this year, let alone the next 4. I actually spent a lot of this break digging deeper into my astrology practice and my tarot practice. So I got this 6-month special discount on the Chani app, and I started listening to her podcast the week ahead. And I cannot tell you how much comfort both the app and the podcast have given me through these crazy ass times. Like, her voice is so fucking soothing. It's like milk and honey and ambrosia. Like, I think about how I took Latin and how the gods are always talking about milk and honey and ambrosia as these like symbols of luxury and comfort and just godliness. And that's Chani's voice, y'all. Like, she got a luxurious ass voice. Definitely more luxurious than mine, but y'all love me, so we carry on. Oh my God. And I'm now just remembering because I could not sleep last night, y'all. Y'all had me rolling with these Drake tweets because, our homie Kendrick won 5 Grammys for Not Like Us, and y'all would not get off Drake's neck. It was a time to be alive, But the Chani app also has sleep stories because people kept telling her how her voice basically puts them to sleep, but not in an offensive way. Like, it's magical. You have to hear it for yourself. But yeah, so I specifically have been digging deeper into my birth chart and learning more about the houses. And so I've been following astrology since I was a kid. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't fully understand, the houses and the Mercury trines Jupiter and the kamikaze and just all of the lingo. So I would just read my horoscopes, but I want to emphasize that these were horoscopes from reputable astrologers, not just what was in the back of a magazine. So I would read my horoscopes and just take what I could understand and leave the rest. And I've been doing that for like 20 years. But since becoming unemployed, still unemployed, BT dubs, but I've gotten to the point in my unemployment where instead of being sad and mopey and, all consumed by my stress, I'm now just taking it as an opportunity to explore things I've always wanted to explore more deeply, but I just never had the time for. Like, I'm learning Spanish, aprendo español, okay? Mira. I'm studying astrology. I'm just trying to find a way to move on and be positive in the face of all of this chaos. But that leads me to my next point, because I had every intention on being active during the break, literally wrote out a to-do list for all the prep I wanted to accomplish and timelines for things. But while I was recording the last few episodes of season 1, I was also in the process of interviewing at a job that I honestly felt like I was a shoo-in for. And I don't say that in a cocky way, I just say that as someone that is cognizant of what they bring to the table. And for this job, I felt like I brought a lot of quality experience, and I got such a good vibe from them from both of the interviews that I had. And then on top of that, it was at a community college, and let me tell you, Becky, but like in the best way possible, like she just got me so hyped about working at a community college. She is obsessed with them because of the real impact that they have on the lives of the people and the students who go there. And she was like, you're going to do so much good. And as you can guess, I did not get the job. And not only did I not get it, but they called me like 2 days before Christmas to tell me. And I was actually kind of shocked at how heartbroken I was. Only because the job would have required me to go into the office 5 days a week. And I was like, ooh, girl, that's gonna be an adjustment. But I actually even got myself excited about that. You know, like just the idea of like, it's been so long since I've had my own little desk at work. And, you know, I was excited to bring in little snacks for my coworkers and to, you know, just be around, you know, I love being around my dog. I love being around my man every now and then. But like, yeah, I just, you know, I was excited. I was. And it really crushed me. It really did. Like, I wasn't eating Ben & Jerry's because this is LA, but I was on the couch with some froyo, some matcha froyo. And it really sent me into this sad spiral that made it really hard for me to get anything done. And then I had some personal relationship stuff that I was going through. But also, I don't want to keep making excuses because it's not who I am. So I bought this really intricate creator planner that is meant to help me stay organized and engaged. And so all of this is to say that I truly value your patience with me and that developments are happening. Things will be published and available very soon. And yeah, you know, I saged the house the other day and I don't know how, but I really feel like it helped me screw my head back on and just get out of my funk. And it's funny because even though I engage in woo-woo shit, I would also say I'm kind of a skeptic too. Or, you know, maybe skeptic's not the right word. I'm curious about how this stuff works, but also it works for me. So then I just move on. I think because I'm in theater, I understand that there's just stuff behind the curtain that I don't need to know about. You know, it worked. I'm having a good time. Things are going great. I don't need to know. But anyway, we are here to talk about interracial friendship. And part of the reason why I wanted to explore this topic for our first episode back is because Black History Month just started in America. And given who was just inaugurated as our president on MLK Day, no fucking less, I know that man was turning in his grave this year. But given the landscape that we're in, and honestly, the landscape that we've been in since 2020 with race relations in this country, I thought it was really important to address. Because I know for me, since the election, it's not just white people I look at differently. Although to be honest, this was to be expected from the white coalition based on what we've seen in prior elections. I'd say this time, though, it's really impacted how I see and relate to people of color who aren't Black. Because these 2024 election results have made it crystal clear, at least for me, that solidarity amongst people of color will never be real as long as non-whites are allowed even just a smidgen of proximity to whiteness. I'm sorry, certain non-whites. Like, it is still so hard for me to wrap my head around the Latinos who voted for themselves to basically be deported or to have their citizenship called into question just because he let y'all feel a little white, a little American. Oh my God, I need to put I Am Not Your Negro on my to watch list this month because there are just so many unfortunate but very true parallels to this current moment. And James Baldwin is just so fucking brilliant and such a great reminder that if you do not know your history, you will be doomed to repeat it. But anyway, so today's interview is with my favorite white woman, Becky Harris. Which is very funny to say because even though I'm more disheartened by the non-Black POCs in this election cycle, we cannot lose sight of why they voted against their own interests, and that is because of white supremacy. I find it so funny to compare Trump's first administration to what it is now because, y'all, the mask is off. Like, at least he was pandering to us in his first administration with Ben Carson and Omarosa and whoever. But now he ain't even celebrating Black History Month. And I don't think that there is one Black person in his administration this time around. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I truly don't think there is any Black person. I know he's got a few dark-skinned bros, a few dark-skinned Indian bros, but I'm pretty sure there are no blacks. And I bring this up because it really gets at what I feel like sometimes is the performative nature of white people's relationships with BIPOC people and how it sows seeds of intense distrust. You know, there's this black guy, I think he's African, or he's like first gen African. And he'd be on TikTok talking about his MAGA family and how he's heartbroken that his MAGA family admitted to him, you know, to his face after the election that they just wanted his vote and now they don't want nothing to do with him. And I know when it comes to MAGA and BIPOC relationships, we want to say, oh, you know, the writing is on the wall, boo, like in all caps too. But as someone who has tried to be in community with white people in more liberal spaces, I think it's really revisionist to act like white MAGAs are the only white people engaging in performative, distrustful relationships with BIPOC people. You know, case in point, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I don't hate Joe Biden. Shit, I was ready to vote for his corpse if he had stayed in. But he did Kamala real dirty. And, you know, listen, I'm not trying to fully both sides it because as we've seen, even performative relationships in liberal spaces can still lead to monumental progress, like us getting our first female BIPOC vice president. However, it doesn't mean that it's any less toxic to have to experience when navigating potential friendships with white people. And so I wanted to talk to Becky today specifically about this topic because, let me tell y'all, she is one of the very few white women I know that can hold space for the inherent distrust that she might encounter from a BIPOC person when first meeting them, while simultaneously not taking it personal, not feeling like she has to hate that she's white, and just having real empathy for someone else's experiences outside of her own. Like, she does with ease what I've seen so many well-intentioned white folks struggle with and give up on. And this is not to say she's perfect. She even admits in our conversation to times where she's gotten it wrong. But what is different is the way in which she is able to admit that she's fucked up and how she keeps trying and keeps engaging and learning. You know, if you've been on this podcast journey with me for this long, I think it's become very clear that even outside of race, friendship takes work. It takes effort. It takes humility and vulnerability and just a lot of scary, uncomfortable emotions in order to be successful. And the real talk is that white people don't need to have black friends, just like black people don't need to have white friends. We can be colleagues, we can be classmates, we can be cordial. And if anything, I know that's how a lot of black people actually go about their interactions with white people, but it's not because they aren't interested in having a friendship. I would say it's because of the high potential for disregard of their feelings or the belittling of their lived experiences, the high potential for gaslighting and abandonment because it's too hard or white people are choosing their peace. Like, there's just something so deeply fucked up about saying that my lived experience disturbs your peace. And I understand that's not the intention, that what you're really trying to communicate is that it's hard and scary and uncomfortable for you to confront your whiteness in proximity to non-whiteness. But I hope that my conversation with Becky today at least proves that it can be all of those things and not impossible. It can be all of those things and still meaningful and worth the work, just like any friendship can be. All right, y'all. The moment is here. I hope you enjoy my conversation on interracial friendships with the amazing Becky Harris. What up, Beck?
What up, girl? How you doing?
Excited to have you back. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. If you'd like to know, there is a bunch of laundry behind me that I just realized. I was like, what is this view? Enjoy.
Oh my gosh. That reminds me of I have a pile of laundry in our bedroom that's just sitting at the foot of the bed right now that I've needed to put away for a week. So
it's just endless. Yeah.
Well, this is our first episode back from the season break. And
yes.
I just I don't know. It's weird. I feel like we are in hell right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know we talk more about that kind of stuff and our feelings on the couch, but
Right.
I had to acknowledge it. But
You can't not acknowledge it.
I was talking to Dee yesterday, and I was saying, I'm like, we're only 4 weeks into the new year, and I feel like we're 20 years in.
It just, it makes me, something's going to have to, like, I'm going to have to get better or more acclimated or something, because I can't keep up this level of anxiety.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to have to change my algorithms. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but it's just not to saying that I don't want to, because I did see a really funny Reductress. You know Reductress, right?
Yes. Are they like The Onion?
Yes. Yeah. But they like do exclusively for female content. And they showed a video of one of their fake headlines was, it was a picture of like a white woman, and she was just like this. And it was like, white woman tries to choose inner peace instead of being anxious. Convenient because she has nothing to lose, or something like that. And so it's like, I want to be mindful of like how much I check out, but like there does need to be some level of it, because it's a lot.
Yeah, no, he's definitely packing his schedules. But I mean, I guess to some degree that kind of wraps into our conversation today, which is about interracial friendship. And
it does though, kind of. Yeah, you're right. It does though.
If you have not guessed already, Becky is a wonderful blonde white woman. I am a Black woman. And our friendship is so fascinating to me, because I feel like it's so different from other friendships that I have with white people and white women in particular. So I'm really excited to just kind of get into this conversation with you. So you are one of the few white women I know that you are so comfortable in your whiteness. And it's weird because I feel like, don't take that as an insult. Like,
I'm not. It's just the funniest phrase. And no, but I love it. Keep going.
You are so comfortable in your whiteness, and yet you are also so comfortable in Black or non-white spaces, I should really say. Like,
okay,
if you're the only white girl in a room, like, you will roll with it, and it's not something that I feel like you're constantly thinking about. I just think that you adapt and just treat it like any other space.
Right.
And I'm just so curious. I know so many white people personally who struggle with being the only white person in a room.
Right.
And I just, like, how did you get like this? How did you become the white woman that you are?
That's so funny. I don't know if I've ever thought about that. So probably a few factors. My mom grew up in the inner city in Newark.
Mm-hmm.
And so she grew up around a lot of Black people. She grew up with like her neighbors, and then she did her medical residency in Virginia, and most of her patients were Black. And then before she was a doctor, she was a teacher, and she was a teacher in the inner city. So most of her students, my mom's just been around a lot of Black people her whole life.
Okay.
And so I think part of me thinks that I have a small memory of when I was little going to like the airport or going places with family friends where there were Black people, and seeing my friends' parents act a little bit different. And I just have this like little vague memory of just noticing that, not really thinking or concluding anything about it as a kid, because I was just a kid, but just noticing that like our family friends just acted different at gas stations when there was only other Black people around. But like my parents didn't, you know what I mean? Like my mom never felt outsider-ish in those spaces, because I think she grew up in those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that could be one. The other one, which I think you know, which is kind of funny, and I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but it might a little bit, was that all my dolls were Black.
This is my favorite story, please. Oh my God. It is the funniest story, but it also just speaks to your mom.
Yeah. So my parents worked a lot, and they would always get my Christmas gifts super last minute. And, sad but true, in suburban central Jersey, there was not as much of an ask for Black Barbie dolls as there were for white Barbie dolls. So whenever my parents would get me my Christmas gifts, like the night before Christmas, the only dolls that were available were the Black dolls. And I was obsessed with Barbies. So ever since I was a little kid, regular boring people throughout the year, if they got me a gift, it was a white Barbie. But Santa gave me Black Barbies. So I don't know. That sounds like a small thing, but it's not. Like that was a really like important thing for me.
Because Santa got me black dolls.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't know. I thought maybe Santa was black or Santa just, I don't know. So like my mom's always been comfortable in black spaces. Santa got me black dolls. I think that's another one. And then as I got older, I think my parents just talked to me a lot about, I don't even know if it's racism, right? Because it's just like, it's all the stories I told you, Day, where my mom would just be like, oh, black women would be treated poorly in my hospitals. So I feel like from a young age, I'm trying to think of like what I think sometimes makes white people uncomfortable when they're in those black spaces.
Yeah. Well, so the other point that I was going to bring up, what is so interesting is that there's usually two types of white people that I encounter. There are white people who are like, by the book white people who, again, are very intimidated and get weirded out.
Right. Yeah.
But then the white people that are usually comfortable are what we would call like wiggers. They're like,
right, totally. And I'm not that at all.
No, you're not that. You don't try to act like you are of the culture. You just kind of exist within it. And I find that so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure if I grew up in like a very white area, so like that would be very inappropriate on my end to try to act, you know what I mean? Like it's much better to be like my like authentic self and like love a culture without trying to be the culture, which I think is the best way to respect and love a culture that you are not a part of, but that you have a lot of love for. But yeah, I was trying to think, like, I was like, why do a lot of white people get uncomfortable when they're like the only white person in a group? And I think one of my guesses would be, obviously I can't speak for everybody, but I think one of my guesses would be that if you are in a group of people that are not white for probably more than an hour, you are going to likely hear some animosity towards whiteness, even just like in passing. And I just think that it kind of reminds me of guys that are comfortable around women, right? Like a guy that can hang with girls knows that in an afternoon of hanging in a house full of women, he's going to probably hear some women talk some shit about men. And it's on that guy to probably understand to some extent the social, worldly context in which those comments are coming from, and to then in turn not take it personally. And I think that's a very similar thing to like what maybe some white people are not accustomed to, you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to guess. I think maybe sometimes there's just been times when I remember we went to the Palms or wherever we went. I had Allison and Vanessa in the room and they just started railing on annoying things that like white coworkers do. And the guy that I was dating at the time got kind of weird about that. He didn't say anything rude about it, but you could tell he was just a little, and I just had to like, I don't know, we went outside for a second and I remember just saying something like, it's not about you. Like brush
Becky,
this off.
But this is like you understand why I'm like, this shouldn't be like a monumental thing for me.
But I feel like because we go through this with guys. So I kind of get what you're saying, at least my perspective of like, that's how I can try to relate to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there are just so many white people where they just struggle with it's not about you. It really is about the system.
Right.
And like, you just get that so intrinsically.
Right. And it's interesting too, right? Because it's like, once again, going back to my like trying to kind of make the analogy with me with like when I'm having it with guys, it's like, it's not about you, but it also is somewhat about you in a way that you can show respect by listening, by not tuning it out, by paying attention, by expressing something that you have, that you're present in the conversation. You know what I mean? But then you don't need to go so far that they're not asking you to like answer for it or like fucking give your opinion about it. You know, it's that like delicate thing of like, be present with it. Don't be dismissive, but also like, I don't know, it's just not about you. And then I would say the last thing is probably, I think like my parents got me comfortable with a certain level of understood anger that would come at white people. Like that's the thing that I think is funny because my mom has a very funny anger towards white people. But she's a white woman. Growing up, I would hear her say things like, oh, that's such a white woman thing to do. And you would just be like, all right. You know, like you're just like, I don't know, that never like offended me because I had a concept of a kid of like what obnoxious white women were without being like it, but it could be separate from but just like understanding it, you know, like I just kind of understood what my mom was annoyed about, you know?
Yeah. But again, even in saying that, it's so fascinating because you also don't do the white liberal thing of being like, because the other difficult situation I have found myself in with white people who are in the liberal space is that it's this weird, it's supposed to be self-deprecating, but then it becomes self-hatery where they're just like, oh my gosh, I suck. I'm an awful white person. White people are terrible.
Yeah, right. And that's not very helpful either.
Yeah.
Because no one, I mean, I shouldn't say no one, but like, once again, going back to the example of if I have a guy friend, right? I don't want the guy friend to just always, anytime we're in a disagreement or we're expressing an exchange of ideas, for him to just always be like, well, I'm a man, so I'm horrible, so I won't ever speak my mind or give my opinion, or you're like, this is not a...
Yeah, because in a way... it's weird because it's almost like they're trying to commiserate, but then at the same time they're asking you for pity. And so for me, I know as a Black person, like, it's just really uncomfortable. And so when I say that, like, you are so comfortable in your whiteness, it's like, again, I can say that, like, I'm really upset at something systemically that has to do with white people.
Right.
And you'll be like, I get that. And also, like, I can't wait to watch the Barbie movie or something. Like, you know?
Yeah,
like-
right. Totally. Yep. And it's interesting too, Day, you brought up like a really interesting point too, that I don't think I've thought about. You phrased it well, where I've always felt that there's something strange with the liberal side of kind of the overcorrecting of whatever that problem is, you know what I mean? But like, yeah, you're right. It's kind of like it's been untangible for me to describe, but there is sometimes when I'm with other white friends, there's kind of like, there can be sometimes, or not even white friends, but other white people, there can be a disconnect in the way that we talk about people who aren't white. And these are like liberal people who I think mean really well, but it's like, it's little things like, for example, just because a Black woman does something doesn't mean she's great, or it doesn't mean that she's automatically brave, or it doesn't mean that she's automatically this or that. And it's cool if you like think that, like that's whatever, but a sign of like overly doing that almost means you think somewhere deep in you, it almost feels like you think you're above them because you feel the need. There's almost like a pity thing. Like, why do you have to over amplify their greatness? You know, there's like this weird, it's almost more respectable to be able to be like, no, like I can treat them as an equal. I don't need to like overly down myself because they are not some like fragile thing that I have to like overly like hit myself on the back to like, does that make sense? I'm explaining that poorly, but there's this weird power thing.
Yeah.
I think when you overcorrect, it can almost be like insulting.
Well, for me, I know
I explained that wrong, but I feel like I can rethink about that again.
No, I hear what you're trying to say though. I think that for me, it when they do the overcorrection, it's less that I feel insulted, although I hear what you're saying there.
Yeah.
And just more so that it feels like an emotional labor to where it's like, because I also feel like it's not even just the, oh my gosh, I'm so awful. It's like I'm so awful, but aren't you going to say that I'm not because like I'm a white liberal and I'm for the people?
Yep. Or there's just this thing, and I don't know if you've ever felt this. There's this like thing that I've noticed that people will do. I think older white women will do this who are liberal more often do this, where it's like they're trying to compliment Black women, or they're trying to compliment Black culture. And I think it happens to Black women a lot. They put so much on that now Black women have become like a caricature. And I remember something of like this kind of came up, for example, I think it was the last election, or maybe it was 2 elections ago, there were some white women that were saying, we just need some like Black women to come in and like be president and like save everything. And I remember Michael Harriot, who at the time was writing for The Root, but now he writes for, is it Grio?
Yes.
Geo?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. He was just like, I know that you mean this as praise, but like there can be dehumanization in like the over glorification of a certain type of people, and the like, what is it called when you hit yourself on the back?
Do you mean the like, because I think it is literally patting yourself on the shoulder, but that's more
no, it's like when you're like hurting your like the
like self-flagellation.
Yes, yeah. So it's like when white people do like self-flagellation in the presence of a Black person, like you were saying, where you're almost then kind of waiting for the Black person to do the labor of saying, oh no, but you're fine. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, did you notice how like Becky will know Black journalists, Black artists, icons? Only white person I know who will just drop somebody's name. Like I can't tell you how many white people I've been in the presence of, and I will be like, oh, like, have you heard about this movie or have you heard about this thing? And they're just like, huh, what?
Yeah.
And then Becky will be like coming here telling me stories about Harriet Tubman and saying like, oh, have you seen what Michael Harriot wrote? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, how do you know this?
But you know what, though? I think what's so interesting is I think part of that is also just about, like, I do that with econ, you know, like I try to like know some econ because I know it matters to Amy, you know, and like I try to like know like maybe what the latest Broadway play is because it matters to my friend Kristen. I remember like touching on stuff because I was like, I just like want to know what my friends are talking about and then they care about. But then, especially with Black culture, you realize that so much of it is stuff that is huge things that need to be talked about that have like mega importance that just are not talked about. You know, it's like Black spaces are often so much more that like Black writers are so much more often than just Black writers. And you and I could go into a whole thing about it. Just shows you how fucking overly white even the most liberal of publications are still. But that's another talk for another day. But
yeah.
Anyways, but yeah. And you know what? I think it also helps, Day, that you and I are both the types of people too. We just respect mutually that we just kind of say what we feel. And I think that like when you know you're in the presence of that, that just like helps you be comfortable, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm curious, did you have either Black friends or non-white friends that were like you were really close to before me? And I know that we, you know, like Gary, who's a Black comedian that we know,
Yep.
You're really good friends with. But if I'm remembering correctly, you met him around the time that you met me. So
yep, I met Gary. I met Gary and Daniel probably like 6 months before you.
Okay.
I had known Sierra and Josh and some other brown people, right? I knew of more. I had more brown friends because of I had more brown friends because I worked at Birds.
But even really, like before your LA life, like did you like back in Jersey?
No, so really what's funny is that the first like 5 or 6 years of me living my life, my parents took me to a daycare that all the doctors took their kids to. And all the doctors were Asian. So all my friends were Asian.
Interesting.
And I remember being really sad that my eyes were so big and that my hair was blonde. And I remember and I asked for Kira. Kira was the Asian Barbie doll. And I only wanted Kira. And I just remember being really self-conscious that I didn't look like Irene and Elena and like my other Chinese girlfriends. Like I felt very like othered, but I don't even really think, no one was like mean to me. You know, no one was like, oh, you white girl. Like I don't know. I just noticed that like the collection of the girls that I hung out with when I was like 5 and 6 were like these beautiful Asian girls that I looked really different from. But I had Amy. Obviously I knew Amy, but she was like, at that point, she was such like already so much like my sister.
Yeah.
That like she was
like, a year older.
And she was a year older. She was like the friend that I came home and had like dinner with and like played outside. But like, you know, there's a certain special place you hold for the friends that you care about that are like at school, you know, at like the lunch table or whatever. So yeah, 3, 4, 5 years old, Elena and Irene were like my like Asian friends. And I remember kind of feeling weird that I didn't look like them. And then I just had white friends because Hillsborough was crazy white. We did have some Black students, but for the most part, they were Nigerian immigrants. And they didn't want to fuck with us either. You know what I mean? Like we weren't as smart as them. We weren't as rich as them. We weren't whatever. And also to be fair, like I don't even think it was a racial thing. Like they didn't fuck with the few Black kids in our school. I mean, they just didn't.
I know. I think that, you know, Africans fuck with Africans.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So, but yeah, no, I really just think it was like, I think it's just a combination of like my natural personality, maybe some stuff about growing up and just for the first couple of years feeling like the only white chick, you know what I mean? Maybe a combination of like how my mom's upbringing was, how I saw her with people of other races, and like how she constantly talked about whiteness and people of other races. And then honestly, I really think it's Santa and the Barbie dolls. Like I'm not joking at how like that was like a really important narrative. You know, like I'm not joking when I say like my narrative world that I created from a very young age had a lot of Black people in them. Like that just I know that's like not, that sounds so silly, but I really do think that.
No, but I mean, I think it speaks to you were just exposed to a lot. And then also like knowing your parents and your mom specifically, like your mom is a very real person.
Yes.
And I think that there's something to be said about her not babying you with those conversations and those experiences. And being real with you with like what she was seeing in the world and what she understood about it.
And I don't know how people listening will take this, but before I make this comment, I was very well cared for. I had drama in my life with my parents, like everyone has had, but I was very well cared for. And so like, this is meant to be like a funny comment, but there was a time when I had come home from school and I was so upset about something. Maybe I was in middle school and I was like crying about it and complaining about it. And from what I remember, it was a pretty like minor problem. And Daisha and I have talked about how like there is a balance that our moms are not always perfect at striking, where it's like, it's good to be reminded that people have bigger problems out there, but also it's good to support your young kid when they have an issue. But regardless of how they always strike that balance, this particular feedback from my mom was pretty funny. So there was this day that I came home and I was just like really sad about something. It was pretty minuscule. And my mom just goes, I don't know how you do it. It must just be so hard. It must just be so hard to be an upper middle class white girl. I don't know how you do it. And I was like 12.
Oh, Sue, I love. Oh my God. But okay, so here's the thing though, because I feel like there are some people who will hear that and just be like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Right.
But I think that there are some white people that will hear that and be like, oh my God, like, why aren't you traumatized that like your mom like racialized you at 12 years old? And
that's where it's like context is really important, because like, it's not like she then didn't help me through whatever I had to go through. I just think that like other parents might have been like, oh, there are kids in Africa starving, right? Like they might have done that. My mom's was much more like, I can give you examples of people literally 5 miles on the other side of town. So why not illuminate those for you as well? You know, we don't need to like create this and talk about this like fantasy world somewhere in some no-named town where kids are just suffering. I can literally put that type of contrast in a much more like tangible, real, rooted in real like American experience, you know? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think she was just always very aware of that. And then, you know what's funny, Day, is I also think an added element was probably when we started at BuzzFeed, I felt very othered because of just like my learning disabilities and how just differently I operate in like a corporate setting. Mm-hmm. And it has always kind of made me more aware of other people being othered. And so I know you know this, but start very early on at BuzzFeed, I was like trying to advocate for myself. And then I also was trying to like advocate for people I thought who were also not being treated the best. And without getting too like political and corporate and whatever, there was some stuff racially at the early stages of the company that I took issue with. And so I think there was a girl, oh my God, I think her name was Candace. Do you remember her? Beautiful Black girl. She worked in like
oh, you mean in production?
In production.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yep. Really, really, really cool girl. And I remember like really early on, like I was like, I think my hair was starting to fall out or something. And so I would start doing like research on like hair issues. Mm-hmm. And I started watching like videos of like Black women talking about like weaves. It's so funny that it happened when I was 18 and then it took me till like 26, 27 to actually be like, I'm just going to shave my head and wear a wig and not worry about it anymore. But like in that interim period, I started like, you know, poking around in the world of like potential fake hair. And that world is very like, you can't not see Black women in that world and like hear Black women's stories and like realize what Black women go through. And like, you know, white chicks who had like the one random white chick that would have cancer and talk about how she had to wear a wig and she was like scared of what guys would think. Meanwhile, it was like for every one of those videos, it was like 50 videos of like Black women talking about how like there's literally nothing they can do with their hair that they don't get fucking weird feedback on from like some dude in their family. Mm. So it just, I don't know, there was just this like huge, like the hair, there's something with the hair thing too that I can't quite put my finger on, but like it just, anyways, I remember that Candace was like, she was kind of cool, like a little like her demeanor was a little cool. And then I think she saw me after work one day, like looking something up. And then I was like briefly, it was like something to do with like hair. And then her and I started talking about it. And I was like talking about how like my hair is falling out or whatever. And then we just had this like really great talk. And then the next day she came up to me and she was like, hey, like, you know, I know you're going to probably shave it or whatever, but I think you're really brave. And I'm thinking of you and I think it'll be a great video. And like, just, I want you to know, like, I fuck with you. And I was like, oh, thank you. Like, thank you for chatting with me, whatever. And then the next week she came up to me and she was like, I also want to tell you something. I think I've told you this before, but she was like, when I first met you, I think I had a little bit of a weird vibe with you. And she's like, but I want to just tell you why. And I was like, okay. And she goes, I think I was mad at you because you get to act at the office how I can only act at home.
Wow.
And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she was like, you get to be kind of funny and bubbly and loud. And you get to do that because if you do that here, you're just the personable white girl. And she's like, if I do that, I'm the loud black girl who's not being professional. And she's like, but the thing you don't know about me is she's like, out of all the girls I've seen, your personality is the most like mine when I'm back at home, but I can't do that here. So she's like, I just want you to know that that's where I was like coming from. And so like that was like pretty early on in like BuzzFeed to have someone be so real with me.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, that really, so I think in the combination with like my hair journey and seeking a lot of like comfort in Black women's like hair stories, but then also realizing, fuck, this thing is like, this affects all of them way more than any of us realize, and this is such a thing and it's so complex and oh my God. And then having conversations like that, you know, with Candace, where she's just being so honest about it.
Yeah. And I'm so curious, and maybe, and I feel like I'm like treating you like a specimen, but like you are, to me, again, just such a, I don't have many, or I'll just say many. I do not have many relationships with white people, and specifically white women, where someone could be that honest with you and you just take it and you hold it. And it reminds me of when I had told you about how people were being awful to Lupita on social media and how Black women get all of this shit.
Right.
And I could tell that like you were like, oh my gosh, like I have no idea what's going on.
Right.
But you didn't deny it. You didn't tell me that I was wrong. Like you just took it. And then you just went and looked out in the world for yourself. And then now you are the one that actually comes to me and it's just like, look at all of these awful men.
Fuck, for real. I know. Oh my God.
So I'm just, because I think that it's hard. I know that intrinsically there are white people out there that don't want to be awful, that actually want to be allies, that want to be connected.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like they are indoctrinated with their white supremacist upbringing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how are you able to just kind of like take in the truths that non-white people have been able to give to you and like not have it impact you?
I mean, man, I don't know. I mean, because like it should impact you, but it's like, you mean that in the way where like listen instead of being upset, right?
Yeah. Like
right.
It's so hard for me. I love that Candace had that honesty with you, and I think it's because she felt like she knew she could, just like how I feel like sometimes that I know I can, even when we were first getting to know each other.
Yep. Right.
And those are like those, you know, as this podcast is about friendship, even outside of race, like those are those moments of vulnerability that can really make or break a relationship. But in particular for Black people, and I think non-white people just in general, because again, it's not that I don't think we want to be in community with white people, but it's like, are we safe to? And a lot of times, like white people will prove to us in their reactions that it's like, oh, this is not safe. You are just my friend that I do painting with, or that I go to dance class with, but that there will always be a limit or a ceiling to how deep this relationship can get.
Yep.
But with you, I think, again, why we are so close and why we're dying in a casket together is because I know that I can have those really dark, painful moments of realization about my place as a Black woman in the world. And you will just hold that and you won't get mad at me about that. And you'll listen to me. And like, so I'm curious how you think you're able to do that, because I know that there are white people who want to be able to do that and struggle.
Yeah. I wonder if it is. I wonder if it's just like this human. You know how they talk about how there's like stages of grief, right?
Mhm.
Like there's a, and I know that grief is not the only thing that like social scientists have like put stages on. I think they do stages for like breakups, they do stages for a lot of things, right? I wonder if there are stages in this, like if we looked it up, because I feel like the stage that a lot of people get stuck on is like maybe defensiveness is like the second stage at first, right? And then maybe after defensiveness is the over inundation of guilt, right? Where then you're just like, oh, I guess I'm just horrible, and like all white people are horrible and all black people are amazing, and I'm so sorry. And like, it's like, shut up. That's not helpful. And then the final one is just this like neutral kind of, once again, going back to like where we would hope more guys would be at, where it's like, I'm not trying to say that like you need to like apologize for having a penis. I'm also not saying that like I need you, like I'm not trying to like come at, I just shut up and just listen. You know, it's like that stage that we hope more guys are at. I think my only thought is that maybe you have to get through it first being a little defensive, and then maybe you have to get through it also this then reactionary thing of, well, then I'm horrible and I'm just horrible. And then maybe you kind of equal out to just, oh, I just have to exist in this reality because this
I'm curious, do
this
you
is the
feel like
reality.
you went through that before? Like, have there been times where you were like, this is a lot for me to bear?
I mean, probably, because I think when I was really little, my parents did not, like, my dad would drive me through Newark, where my mom grew up, on the way to the airport. And he would just randomly tell, because my dad always told me history. My dad always was like telling me stories. And he would just randomly explain how these houses here were made for the vets when they got back from war. And they were not as nice as the ones that my grandparents live in Chicago that were made for the white Army vets. But black Army vets had to live in these houses. Or we would drive past something and my dad, literally, I remember like something would happen, like a kid would like come up on our yard, you know, the night before Halloween or something and like throw toilet paper and like be an asshole and be white and just be a white, stupid, obnoxious boy. And I would be like, I don't know, like 10. And my dad would just make a comment about like, you know, if that was a black boy in this neighborhood, he would be like, I don't know, just these little, just these like, and I think there must have been at some point, maybe I just felt overwhelmed by like my guilt, or you know, I mean, I think because I guess the only reason why I'm saying that that must have been, and I must have felt defensive, or maybe I skipped defensive because it was so young, but then there must have been at some point something where then I had that overly just really bad feeling of like, oh, we're just we're just like horrible, and I don't know how we even, and I think that actually comes from initially the defensiveness, right? I think that's like actually the root of the first feeling, because I remember having that like feeling of being like, just, oh my God, well, we're just so horrible, and I don't know when, I don't know if it was in college or if it was like right when we moved to LA, but I kind of just, there was something going on with women's rights at that time. I think it was when Obama was up for re-election. There was like something going on, and I was at Birds, and I do have a memory of some guys just kind of doing this overly like, well, I guess just all men are just horrible, or like something. I don't know. I have a memory of being like, I hate them doing this. This is so not helpful. And it like clicked where I was just like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's whether it's for me being straight or me being wealthier or me being white or me being whatever, like this is annoying. Like this is not the way that guys are responding, and they're trying to be like an ally to me right now, but this is, I don't know. I just remember having this things of, so I don't know. I think there's part of me that feels like maybe it happened. I went through those stages when I was younger, but maybe it's so stretched out that they're not as like burned in my brain, you know. I have distinct memory of being younger and feeling a little defensive, like, why do my parents always say that like brown kids have it worse? And then I remember being at Birds in my early 20s and being like, okay, well, I'm no longer defensive. Now I just feel super guilty. But man, these dudes feeling super guilty, this isn't helpful either. So I definitely don't want to do that when I respond to other, you know, social issues like race and all that kind. So yeah, maybe it was like these like later stage. I mean, because it makes me think that part of the answer is just that like you got to start people getting into these feelings like earlier, like it just,
even just being honest about them too.
Yeah, right. It wasn't like my parents like over glorified it. You know, like my mom could still be mad at someone who was black. You know, it wasn't like it wasn't this like overabundance of like pity or something. It was just like this world exists where it's like they are like, you are both equal beings, but there's also this very harsh reality that you cannot ignore.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I just think that like, it's probably a really good argument for all that bullshit that people say about how you don't want to upset white kids too much too young.
Yeah.
I mean, I just like, it didn't make me feel, yeah.
There's so much privilege in that. Like, I remember when Trump won, and the thing that kind of really offended me most was all of these articles of these white parents being like, oh my God, what do I tell my kids now that Trump has won? And
right.
blah, blah, blah. And it's like the same shit that Black and brown parents have been telling their kids.
Yeah. I just think that like from a really young age, if you start hearing about all the bullshit that really happens and like real stories, like this isn't my mom telling me my mom is literally like, I would see this happen. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's just like, oh, and I should say actually another important thing is that my school was hella racist. Mm-hmm. So that was another thing was that like, and then I remember going to UMass and I remember these white guys would find Black girls at parties and try to like dance with them as like a joke and then like take photos of themselves like dancing with these girls and then like post them. And people thought this was like funny. And I was just like horrified by this. I think also that's part of it is that if you fucking pay attention to stuff, there's no way you can then ever be in a, like if you're a person who chooses to like pay attention, then there's no way that I could ever be in a room with a bunch of brown people complaining about white people and be like upset about it. You know, like you're just like,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think for me, like, that's like the hardest part about some of my interactions with white people sometimes is that I'm just like, no one's here trying to hurt your feelings.
Right.
But like, this is just the reality.
Yep.
It's a reality that none of us want.
Right.
But it's just so weird to me how, again, it's not even like, I think that what can also be hard is that because then a lot of white people are like, well, then what do I do? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to kill myself?
And isn't that so obnoxious? Because then it's like, once again, you're making it about you. And it's just like, that's such a not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it also is easier for people like you know, because like Day, you have a lot of empathy for people who are perhaps come from less socioeconomic background than you, or don't come from having like supportive parents, or who you have empathy for people where academia does not come easy for them, or where, you know, they are trans or non-binary, you know, like there are a lot of groups that you don't have like allegiance to, but you also have like empathy with. And I think the same thing could even be said for like you. The same thing that allows you to have that is also in some ways, I think could speak to like my experience, which is just that like you do your best to just take the things that you do understand when like you do feel othered and just be like, well, how would I want to be? It's hard to say. You don't want to say I know we're trying not to say how would I want to be treated because the new golden rules treat people how they would want to be treated. Yeah. But I think somewhere you have to still start a little bit within putting yourself in their shoes a little bit, right? And I think that to me has always helped me where it's like, man, wouldn't I want someone to just shut up and listen? Like that's all I would want from somebody. Like I would just want like, yeah. So I think that plays into it. I mean, I'm really learning about myself in this is that like it really comes off like I hate men. I keep being like every time I'm like, oh well, the frustration that you feel, I just attach that to what my hatred towards men. Like I just need to preface that if you are a man listening, I don't hate men. I'm just realizing.
No, I mean it's the same thing. Like, you know, like it's so crazy how we have to have these qualifiers because it's just like I don't hate white people.
Right.
I don't hate white women.
Right.
But like y'all get on my nerves sometimes.
Right.
And that's just the real thing.
Right. No, totally. It's so interesting. And I think like I was gonna say there was probably like one other factor, which is that like you and I just have always been interested in dissecting media. Mm-hmm. You know, like that's why we both became people who have like are interested in like communications and journalism and video like storytelling, right? And so I think from like if you pay attention, if you have your like eye on that, there's like no way that you wouldn't also pick up on some of that, I guess. I would love to know like how do you like, because here's the thing I find interesting too, is that I've had, this is so funny to admit, but I've had like white friends back home. This is a true thing. I don't think I've ever told you this day. I have some random white friends from back in Jersey who will like have recently made like a new black friend at work or something and have actually like asked me, how do I navigate like racial conversations? Or like if something happens in the news, like, do you talk to your black friends about it? Like if it's like a racial thing, like literally like ask me like how, and what I find so funny about that is I was like, I feel like the most important thing you could do is not act like my black friend in LA is a spokesperson for your black friend in New Jersey. Like, I just feel like that is so...
I know. It's so interesting to hear that because on one hand, you know, I feel like in the Black community, we are often saying like, white people, y'all need to go talk to white people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. In one way, that's good that they're coming to, yeah, right.
So in one way it's good, but then in the other way, like I could never imagine you doing that. And I think that part of that is just because it's weird. Like I almost feel like another thing is that white people, I guess like you said, it's not like they see us as equals. They see us as, oh, my black friend. So like, how do I deal with this with my black friend? And it's like, you just talk to them like they're a person and you like hear them out and like, you know, like, I mean, I think it's a bigger issue of like, we just don't know how to have difficult conversations. And like, unfortunately, my race is a difficult conversation sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And I think you've mentioned this before too. I think the other important thing is the understanding, because I remember after George Floyd happened, you know, I knew that you and I could talk immediately about it because we were in constant contact with each other. I knew, for example, that my friend Daniel was somebody who was a very sensitive soul. And he would really appreciate me just reaching out and just telling him that, like, I love him. I knew that my friend Gary didn't want to hear from me. You know, like, I just, like, you know that, you know, I knew Vanessa would be sending me something long-winded and she would then want me to donate to something. So I'm just going to I'll let her take the lead on that. Like, even within that, like, my different black friends are going to have different reactions. And you have to kind of just like I knew Cynthia was going to show up and just be like, I don't want to talk about it. You know, like I literally knew that there was like, because these are people that I know and they're not like a monolith. They don't all, but the one thing that you can count on is that this thing is going to really affect all of them. So in a way it is, you know, it's like there's a unity, but then there's also individuality and you have to just navigate it. So yeah, I think you're right. It comes down to just like racial issues highlight things that we are already struggling with as people. And I think it highlights that we already struggle with having difficult conversations.
Yeah. And I think back to that and you bringing that up, like, it's so funny to have like my experience with you. And then at the time I was in grad school and there was a white girl who I just felt like she wanted me to see her so bad. Like she was texting me, she was calling me, she was just being so obnoxious. And it was just like, girl, I got the message. I got it. Mm-hmm. I hear that you support me. At this point, you hounding me like this is about you and not about me.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And then it becomes this thing of like, do you even see me? Like what, or am I just like the black friend? Because how could you not see that this is not how someone would want you to handle this? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's just, yeah.
It's like, let me respond in my own time. I'm like, the reason why you want me to respond right now, like, oh, I see you, is again, that emotional labor from the guilt that you feel.
Right.
And it's like that guilt is for you to sit with and for you to, like, if you are genuinely sending this message to me and you want me to receive it, then you need to let me receive it in my own time.
Right.
And I know that like that is something that I think a lot of white people struggle with.
Yep. Yeah. And I forget, I remember having a really interesting conversation with Allison at that time and her saying something. It was like her saying something like the way that certain people were reaching out to her. By the way, this girl lives in Canada. So it was just, I think that there was a little bit of a disconnect there, but she was just like very interested in like dissecting it with me. And like we were sharing articles and we were, you know, all this kind of stuff. And then shortly after that, or maybe maybe it was a few months, because that was during COVID, but like a little after that, Gary and Daniel's cousin Aisha was visiting. And I remember Aisha and I were talking about it. And it was literally the exact opposite way that Allison had wanted to deal with it. Like Aisha was like, I don't want articles. I don't want whatever. I just want to like, it is so traumatizing to me. It is so sad to me. I don't want to dissect any of it. I don't want to look at it. I'm tired of it being everywhere. There's nowhere I can go that I can't see it. And I don't owe anybody the strength to have to be okay seeing this again and again. And she like got like angry, you know what I mean? And you realize you're like, I have one friend here who's enjoying dissecting every fucking piece of it. I have another friend here who's literally about to like pop if she even like hears it again. There is literally no way you can be a respectful friend and navigate any of this unless you choose to be so attentive to how each and every single person feels and how every person is like different. You have to be putting your attention on that friend, which is one of the pillars of being a good friend. You know what I mean? And it's like what that fucking white bitch was doing with you was so not being a good friend. It was just, this is about me. This is self-serving. I need to like self-soothe. I know also just people are like, if they're like, wow, Becky got triggered really quickly on this podcast. I also know the person Daisha's talking about, and I dislike this woman very much. So if anyone's like, what just happened to Becky? Why is she so angry? I also really hate how this person treated you. But anyways, we can just,
No, No, what I was going to say too, I think what's also troubling and that I don't think that a lot of white people understand that they do is that they try to do this one size fits all with their response to big events like that, where it's just like, oh, well, so-and-so is okay with dissecting articles. Like, why doesn't this work for you?
Right.
Why
You're both black women. Right. Right. Yeah. And that's just not... that goes back to that classic thing of like someone getting in trouble for saying the N-word. And then, their stance for it is, well, I had a black friend back in school that let me say it. And it's like, I don't give a shit. That's not how that works.
But I do think it'll be interesting. And I think it's interesting for white people to sit with. It's like, it's weird how like we almost have to come up with those things where it's like, oh, well, as a woman, like I wouldn't want this. And it's just like, like as a woman with Roe v. Wade getting overturned, like how would you feel if someone like was just like, oh, but this was okay with the other woman I just chatted with, why is this okay with you?
And you're right. I think once again it goes back to like there is some level of collective experience that you are not wrong in trying, no matter who the group is, you are not wrong in trying to use whatever knowledge you've collected throughout your life on this group to help steer you in the most appropriate behavior. It's just that like in doing that, you have to also be incredibly receptive to the fact that like they are individuals. You know what I mean? So I think, it's like the minute you start to get any sense that this approach is not working, it's like all sensors need to be on for the fact that this might not work, because it's like you can even approach somebody and be like, I'm bringing this to you because I feel that this is what I care for you and I feel like this would be the best. If at any moment I feel that this is not and you don't like this, like you just have to be so incredibly ready to like pivot. But I think you've talked about this before. I don't know if you've talked about this in a BuzzFeed video or if you've talked about it on the podcast, but I think or maybe I just read it. Maybe I just read it somewhere. I don't know. But it was like, you also just have to like be comfortable with getting it wrong. Like maybe not always, but I think like in a lot of cases, it's better to have a minor mishap than do nothing at all.
Yeah.
Like depending, but then you have to just trust that you are then truly open and willing and ready to like,
it's like,
make the move.
It's okay to let people teach you how they want to be treated.
Right.
Like I get the desire to want to get it right, but to what you said, like we're not always going to get it right. And so I think instead of being guilty or upset with yourself that you didn't get it right, I just think that you do such a good job of being like, oh, that didn't work. Thank you for letting me know.
Yep. On to the next.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the person might be pissed at you for a second. You know what I mean? Or you might not be their favorite white person for a hot minute, but now you know, and you're going to let things cool. And they're hopefully your friend for a reason too. And judging by the fact that if you were able to have built that friendship, you're not the first white person that's probably upset them. They'll know how to bounce back. Like just everyone will bounce back, but you just kind of have to go from like somewhere. Right. Yeah. And it's just like,
it's important not to demand it. Cause I think that some white people will demand it. And it's kind of similar when I think about like the politics thing and how there are people who are not speaking to certain family members that voted for Trump, and they're almost kind of demanding. They're like, why don't you talk to me? Why are you doing this?
Right.
Why can't you? And it's just kind of like, you can't demand someone engage with you.
Yep.
You know?
Right. Yeah. And like sometimes someone's just not going to feel comfortable talking to you about something. And you kind of have to just, with each and every friendship, there are going to be things that are just like, I don't know if I'm handling this right. Like, I think back to one of my very good friends in college was like sexually assaulted. And like, I thought that the way that she would want to deal with that would be to have like this like constant sense of like protection, so we would go to parties. And after that, I'd always say a thing of like, and I'll just be right here. Or, like, I'll be here at the end of the night, or like if you don't get back, you know, if we're not back at the car by whatever, like don't worry, like I'll come find you. And eventually she had to just be like, you're making it hard to forget what happened. Like we need to not go into every single frat party like it's a hostage negotiation. Like just ease up. And I was like, oh, okay. And I could tell she was like, she had kind of wished that I would have gotten the hint before she had to like tell me that, and she was a little frustrated with me. But it was just like, all right, the next best move now is to let her get some. She's annoyed with me now. Like, I'll take the note. I'll come back again. I trust that she knows I had the best intentions, but it also annoyed her. So like, I'm gonna let her cool off, and then like I'll feel it out. We'll come back around. But it would have been exponentially then worse if I had then been like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, and then just made it even. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, all right, take the note, because the goal was the whole process of why you were doing this was not for yourself; it was for her.
Yeah.
So it's just like, take the note. But like,
how do you think that you got comfortable with feeling it out? Because I think that that's another thing that's really intimidating, both in the sense of like, you know, if a white person is maybe pissed off their person of color friend, or they're in an awkward situation, I think they get really scared about this idea of like feeling it out.
I mean, maybe that comes down to being lucky that I just had a couple of really good friendships from a very young age. You know, like maybe that's to the credit of like Amy, like my first, you know, best friend growing up. If I like upset her, I guess from a very young age, I learned that like if I always just tried to be the best friend that I could be, that even if I fucked up, like I could pretty much count on the fact that we'd ricochet back to each other. You know, maybe there's something in learning early on, like the lessons of like, because I'm trying to imagine what if I'm trying to think and put some empathy in people who maybe don't feel so secure with that. And I could imagine that maybe growing up, if you fucked up and then people just never came back, and I could maybe imagine where all of this like anxiety about, well, then it's better to say. So maybe it's that. But I also just think I'm so fucking ADHD and impulsive and obsessed with communication that I also just sometimes I think I don't even know if I necessarily chose it, or if like my brain chemistry just literally doesn't let me pick any other way. You know, like I think part of me is just like, well, we're just going to try this, and now we're going to try this. That doesn't work. Well, I'll give you 20 minutes and I'm going to try something new. Like I
don't hear in that though is like a commitment to the relationship, and that like, because I think what can be so challenging for me, and this is, you know, I've experienced this with Black friends, white friends, it's this feeling of like we've hit a rough spot and then they just fucking, they're like, I'm out, 10 hands up, like it's over. I have nothing left to say or give. And it's like, really? That's it? Like we're calling it on this X many years friendship?
Right. Maybe that's being an only child and knowing that from a very young age that you build your family. So I take friendship really seriously. Maybe that's just being innately from a young age really valuing friendship and having parents that didn't necessarily get along. But even when they did, I could always tell that they were happier when they had good friends around them. And so you just kind of have this like thing of like, this is a really valuable thing and it takes dedication. And like I said, we want to be careful about how much we do the treat people how you'd want to be treated, right? Because it's supposed to be how they'd want to be treated. But you start from yourself, you learn initially from yourself. And I just remember being like, I always appreciated when friends didn't give up, because sometimes they would, you know, like I was such a weird kid. And I'm trying to think of a silly example. I was at a sleepover. I remember I was like anxious, and I think Amy tried to like play music or something, but like it's actually can be like really hard for me to go to sleep when there's music.
Yeah.
So then I got even like more anxious, and I remember, I don't know how old I was, but like I don't know, I was kind of being weird. Like I was like, oh no, not that, and just like I don't know, like what a stressful vibe to be like a 7 and 8 year old trying to have a sleepover, and you got this girl who's like just on something. But I don't know, and I remember Amy just being like, okay, sorry, well then we just won't do that. It was just this, all right, on to the next. Yeah, I don't know, maybe just being exposed to that healthy loop. But I do think you and I both, if we both had to ask each other why we are so passionate about, for example, just like at the heart of it, communication, I'm sure you and I could both think of, you know, it's that nature versus nurture, right? I'm sure we could both think of like nurture things, of things that actually like happen to us. But I also think to some extent, it's just also nature, like it's just how your brain is. So yeah, I think I definitely think it's a little bit of both. What I think is I wanted to ask you, Day, is like, I honestly want to extend the question to you as well, though, because like I know I have a collection, like Cynthia, for example, is less comfortable around white people. And she's told me that. Do you know what I mean? Like she would often comment that we were like rare in the fact that we were like these two, me and Amy, that she would help like train. We were like these two rare cases. You know what I mean? There was just this thing. Vanessa has said that she's more comfortable in the presence of like Black people. But then I know, for example, Gary grew up in an all went to an all boys black school, and then he was in an all black fraternity, and then him and his roommates from college came out to LA, and all of a sudden all of them were in these incredibly like white spaces. And I remember his other black friends being like, Gary, you're just so, how are you just so at ease? You know, like what is it that, and I do think like you're very adaptable too, Day. Like I don't know what do you credit to like your adaptability?
It's interesting. I mean, I think part of it is just that growing up, everyone called me a white girl and I just couldn't. And it's so funny because when I had my conversation with Dee was like, I don't understand why anyone would call you that.
Right.
And to a certain degree, I mean, I like kind of see it. Like I liked Lizzie McGuire and I liked also like Hilary Duff, like that Metamorphosis album, like was a banger.
That's so funny. Can you imagine if that was the reverse, right? Like I fucking growing up, I loved Sister. I mean, the late 90s was just like the bastion of like black television. Growing up, you had like Cosby, but then you also had just like Sister, Smart Guy, yeah. Moesha, Family Matters, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It was just like I think there's another one I'm forgetting, but like there was just this, everyone loved Fresh Prince. Everyone watched Family Matters. Everyone watched all these like black family. Can you imagine if people were like, that made you not white? But like you like Lizzie McGuire and you're fucking labeled a white girl. Like it's just insane to me.
But well, I mean, the big thing though was that it was just that I liked school, which was like another like very loaded and coded form of self-hatred.
Yeah.
That for whatever reason, being educated was like a white thing to do. And
yeah.
I loved school. I loved learning. I felt I excelled in those areas.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, everyone growing up, because I grew up in a black community, I was the white girl. And so then when I went to boarding school, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be with my people because I'm really a white girl, right? And then it was so weird because I remember going to boarding school and just being like, oh, whoa, I am not white in the slightest.
Yeah, right?
And then the funniest thing too, though, is that it was the other thing was that it was also thrown back at me that people were like, oh, you're so black. Oh my gosh.
That's so crazy.
But I'd be doing the same shit, you know, like I'd be when I was in grade school and in high school, I was obsessed with Baby Phat. I was obsessed with all the like black name brands.
Right.
I rolled up to school in my headscarf in grade school and in high school.
Right.
But like, again, in both of those environments, I was seen as a white girl for X reasons. And for one, I was seen as a very hella black girl for X reasons.
That's so crazy.
And so I just think for me, like, I'm like, I've always just been doing the same shit. So I'm going to still keep doing the same shit.
Right.
And you're just going to say what you say. So
that's so crazy to me.
But I do feel uncomfortable in white spaces sometimes. I just think that for me, I'm like, yeah, you know, white people are going to white. You guys are like, you know, when I was in grad school, I was not comfortable. I mean, I was primarily with white people for my first, I want to say like 2 years. And that was actually the first time I think that I was like very uncomfortable. But at the same time, I was like, I'm paying too much money. I need to come and get this education. So I was just like, y'all gonna do what you do.
Right.
And I'm going to be over here. So, yeah, it's not that I'm not uncomfortable. I just also think that depending on like why I'm in the space, I will think more about that than my discomfort.
Yep. What's like your earliest memory of being like conscious of it?
Of white people?
Or conscious of being like, am I in a more black or white space? Or I guess actually more than if I'm in a more black and white space, like what's your like first memory of like people are seeing me as more white or black? Because what it sounds like you're saying to me is like oftentimes your behavior was the same. It was just depending on the situation you were in, like you were saying, like your clothes and the way you carried yourself. In some spaces that was seen as we're not even paying attention to this and that, we're paying attention to this and that, so you're white. And then others it was the reverse. And I was like, oh, now we're seeing like very much it seemed like you were just doing you.
Yeah.
And then wherever you were, people had a different opinion on it. That's a lot for a kid.
Yeah. So like, you know, I remember in grade school, like, I think I was seen as white because it's like I liked Paramore and I was getting into like Panic at the Disco. And
right.
People were like, oh my gosh, you're going to boarding school with all those white people.
God.
But then when I got to boarding school, so one of the biggest incidents that we were kind of like slapped with was that somebody had written on the wall, I wish all niggers would die. And so I remember I was a freshman and there were 4 black kids in my grade. grade. So,
Oh my God.
you know, as a whole school, we like talked about it. But I also think what was interesting is that the school took a really interesting approach in that they were like, we could go after this singular individual, but they were like, the fact that this individual thought that this was a community that they could do something like that and get away with it, that they were actually much more invested in like, we want to change the culture of the environment so that nobody thinks that that's okay to do.
Right.
Versus just saying, we're just gonna pick this person out and that's gonna deal with the root cause.
Right.
And so I really valued that choice and perspective. And so we actually, I think we started what was called Community and Equity. And so like every month, like we would have programming where we would bring in people to talk about these really difficult conversations about race and other things in the world. And so, yeah, it's like, even though I was in that very predominantly white space, I appreciate the steps that they took to rectify the culture so that like, even though, I mean, so here's the other interesting thing too, because when George Floyd was happening, kids in private school, Black kids in private school, they were making these pages on Facebook or not Facebook, Instagram, that was just like, oh, like what it was like to be Black at X school. Mm-hmm. And so they had it for my school and I was reading them and I was like, oh my God. And it's funny because I don't know. So there's two things that I want to point out, because so we would have alum of color events where alums of color would come back and talk to us. And I remember an alum of color saying to us, they were like, your ability to fraternize with white people is going to be the greatest unpaid skill that you could ever master during your 4 years here.
Wow.
Your ability to just know how to be around white people, you should be paid so much more for it, but it will take you so much further in life than you will ever think.
Wow.
And I remember hearing that and being like, oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But then I got
That's funny that you bring that up, because I remember my parents did a program called the Fresh Air Fund. And it's when they take inner city, they don't have to be Black, they just often are. It's like you opt to help parents in inner cities who are behind on bills, who maybe need a vacation, who just, it's the summer and their kids are home and their kids are getting in trouble and it's driving them crazy. And they can essentially, without any guilt, they can sign their kids up to this program, and like wealthier white people, they don't have to be white, but it just often they are. These people that sign up will take these kids for a few weeks in the summer and they'll feed them. They'll take them to Six Flags. They'll let them swim in their pool, but they'll basically just like, parents, go do your thing. No questions asked. We have your kids, right? So my parents are a part of that program. And so for several years in a row, they had these two boys that they would take. And then it got to the point where the boys were just like so obsessed with girls that they were like trying to sneak out to find girl. It just got to the point where it was like they've surpassed the ability. But my parents would take these two boys, and the boys had the first year was great. They loved the pool. They loved going. My parents could entertain them like whatever. Quickly the next year, it was like, why do I want to be with these old white people? I'm so bored. But my dad was like, you know what? Even if the boys don't realize it now, he's like, one of the things that they've gotten better at the couple years they've come here is navigating these white spaces. And I remember my dad saying something like, I hate to say it, but it's true. This will give these boys an advantage. Like these boys know, like these boys didn't even realize it. But within the few years of visiting my parents, and it's so fucked. It's so fucked that even has to be, because obviously the fact that that's a skill that is valued speaks to a deeper rooted problem. But in terms of just letting these boys flourish, right? Like, we're not going to fix that systemic thing in the next couple of years, but it could potentially help them like get an internship. But yeah, it's crazy that when you think about the amount of effort that people then have to put into that then the other group, like the white people in the space, have just no concept of.
Yeah. And so I was going to say, like, when I got to college, I really saw that firsthand, because there were so many Black women where college was their first time having to be in a predominantly white space.
Right.
And the way that these white kids would do shit. And I'd just be like, white people.
Right.
Because I was used to it.
Yep.
And they, like, it really took a toll on them. And I was just like, this is nothing new. And so it was easy for me to just kind of be like, like,
Yep.
You're not distracting me. I'm getting back to it.
Do you think that, like, And that's different, you would say, than like code switching, right? I mean, it's more about like, this is just also talking about like your ability to emotionally not burn out from it or not react to it. Are you just talking clearly about just your ability to be comfortable in those spaces?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting with the code switching thing. I don't think I've ever been a code switcher because
Right.
even like my white high school friends will tell you, it's so funny how growing up, like I talk to them like how I talk to anybody. So I'll
Yes.
be like,
I've
"Bitch,
noticed
like
that.
you won't believe what this motherfucker did." Like I will talk
Yep.
like that to them.
Yep.
And so at first, again, because we were young too, like they were just like, "Oh my gosh, Daisha, like what does that mean? That is so interesting. What did you say? Say it again. What?" You know? And I
Yeah.
just be like, anyway, so as I was telling you, this motherfucker was blah, 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 blah.
Right.
To where now it's just kind of like I'm still like that, but because I didn't code switch and I was just kind of like whatever, they're just like, yeah, okay, oh my gosh, I can't believe he did that. Like what? Like now they've gotten so I was reading that I guess Michelle Obama does this, that she's not a code switcher, but she's what they call a code mesher. And I feel like aligns with me a lot better because I think when I was younger, I had patience, right? Now I feel like if someone was like calling out the way that I speak like that, I would just be like, all right, well, this is nice to meet you. This was a wrap. Or maybe not even nice to meet you. This is just a wrap. It really just depends on like how I feel about you and if I want to put in that labor. Because I think now I know that is labor. And I think when I was younger, I didn't understand, one, that it was labor, and two, that it was taking a toll on me.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I've always just been, I'm like, I'm talking to you the way that I talk to anybody. You know, I talk to Jess that way, who is my white partner. I talk to you that way. Like, I'll explain some shit if you're just like, wait, I don't understand that. Hold on. Could you tell me?
And I've noticed that. I've noticed that when you're on the phone or when you're talking to D or when you're like, I've noticed that I can't tell what race of friend you're talking to. Because I think I noticed that because with other Black friends of mine, I can tell. It's very clear when other friends of mine are now speaking to someone who's either like, I can tell when Gary's talking to like someone who's white or Black. Like I can tell if like Cynthia is telling me a story and it was with a white client or a Black client. Like I can just, but with you, it's really, it really is just like you. And I just like to really underline like, that is no shade towards anyone who switches. Like there's neither one is like better. Right. It's just,
Yeah. I just think for me, like, and it could just be, I am a Leo. And I just think that like, I'm a very direct person. And I've just always felt I'm not going to, if anything for me, if I'm code switching, it's because like I'm at work. And so like, I will put on maybe a more professional voice when I am at work.
Right.
But I don't with like people who are supposed to be my friends. I'm just kind of like, again, you're supposed to be my friends. Like it's supposed to be like where I'm most safe and most comfortable. So if you're white, you're getting all of this.
And then the other thing I was going to ask that we can maybe cut this. I don't know. I think this might tie into something that you were going to talk to somebody about in another episode. So, but I remember when we were getting closer, I remember thinking to myself, if I were Sierra, or if I were Josh, or if I were Daisha, or Gary, or Daniel, or or Vanessa, I would appreciate not being the only brown person in a room, you know? So I remember being like, I would tell anybody that they could bring their friends, but I would be even more like literally Gary, like, I don't know if you remember, like, Gary had a friend for a while that would come around, something with the last name Hill. He had a great voice.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes. I remember him.
Yep. And there was a couple others. And Josh had a friend that would come around sometimes, and Sierra would bring somebody. And I remember just like I could just tell that it was a thing. Once again, going back to like my analogy of like with guys, like if I was going to go into like an all male, mostly male space, I would appreciate it if like my guy friend hosting the thing, maybe anyone could bring somebody, but I would love it if he had an extra sensitivity to tell the few women coming, you are exponentially, and please bring other women, you know, like just so that we don't feel so alone, you know what I mean? So I remember trying to be conscientious of that. early on, because I could tell that not so much with you, but with others, like I think especially with like Sierra and other people, they felt more comfortable when they didn't feel like bombarded by like it was them and then like 20 white people. You know what I mean? And I still try to be sensitive to that because I can imagine. I just like having. It's like how I just try to have enough single people at a party if a single person's coming. I just like making sure people are comfortable at parties. And so like we've touched on it a little bit, but in recent years, because friends of ours have like moved and things have just shifted in our social dynamics, and and this won't always be forever, but at the current time, it is more of like it's like when we hang now, it's like you, me, and one of our other white friends. Is that hard for you ever? Like, do you ever feel is your nervous system able to kind of like relax in that, or is there just kind of this wish of like there's always just that little thing in your head of like I don't have someone else here because like I mean if the answer, regardless of what the answer is, we can't do anything about it right now, but like I just find it interesting like where are you at with that?
No, yeah, totally. It's interesting. It depends. Like I don't, because you guys are both, again, I think because you're so good at being such an empathetic person and stuff like that, and like Amy's such a great listener.
Yeah.
Even though like I'm the only Black person in the space often, it doesn't really like necessarily like stick out to me.
Yeah.
Because there are certain spaces where like the issue is not that I am the only Black person in the room. It's that the white people in the room are making me feel like I'm the only Black person in the room.
Right. I see the distinction. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're like, I don't know, almost putting me in situations to like highlight those differences. Whereas like what's so funny is that, so you and Amy were over here the other day and I had a Lifetime movie on in the background with a bunch of Black people in it. And Becky is just enthralled. And like I could put on a Black movie and you're not going to be like, oh my God, like I get
so you have like reinvigorated my Lifetime passion. I'm like watching these movies and I'm like, I've been sleeping on Lifetime. Like what is like what?
Well, Jess isn't gonna like that.
But, no, I know he's not. But like
like I even remember like Christmas time, like there happened to be a Black movie on and I put it on and it wasn't a weird thing. You just went with it and you were interested in the story. Like it wasn't such an event that there just happened to be Black people on the screen.
Right.
You were just kind of like, wow, like this is a really interesting story.
Yep.
You cared about the story more than the fact that there just happened to be Black people on screen. Like,
yep.
And so I think that that's more of so like when I'm hanging out with you guys, it's not a huge thing because I can still engage in like Black conversations or Black content or whatever. And you guys are just going to talk about it like regular people.
Right.
Versus being like, oh, like, I don't know, like, or maybe like we shouldn't do it. Let's talk about Taylor Swift. Like,
right.
Like I can't, that would be difficult.
Right.
But that being said, I do think that there are times, like, it's funny, Dee and I were talking about this yesterday. She's in Minnesota and she's met like a few Black people, but like she still wishes that she could be in more community with Black people. And I think that that's still where I stand. So it's like, even though I love you guys and I'm comfortable around you guys.
Of course, yeah.
I do still feel like sometimes I'm like, yeah, it would be nice to like throw another homie in the mix.
Yeah, no, of course. And it's like, it's not like because it's like we do outings where potentially we have other friends. It's not like we only ever do things where it's just three of us, right?
Yeah.
Like we have other opportunities to like see people. It's just that like, you think about that, it kind of ties into our conversation of like, as you get older, life gets busier, other things happen, people have jobs, you move. It's just a few years ago, it was just so much easier for us to have a social gathering where it was just so much more of a diverse group. It isn't probably just race. I mean, it's probably a lot of different components of like, you just get into this place where like friendships are harder and it's harder to get together and it's harder to whatever. And so like, yeah, like you can be in this place where you're like, I'm just appreciative that we can all get together and that we make the drive and going through everything we're all going through, we're still able to whatever. But it's like, it doesn't mean that like that shit still doesn't matter. And it still doesn't, it makes me also think about how there's another thing that, and we could probably cut this. I'm probably going to go off on a tangent that is not helpful, but with all this DEI stuff that they're talking about in the news and like cutting it, and with like Zuckerberg being like Meta's too like female-ish and he wants to make it more male and whatever. It's like, I also like, I don't think that like companies also understood these initiatives, they weren't just these like little fun experimental initiatives. Like they were the opportunity for like a lot of healing for like a lot of people. Like I remember working at Netflix and the only 2 Black women that were on my team, I ended up being put on an assignment with, and so the 3 of us would like FaceTime a lot or like Zoom a lot. And they ended up being like really honest with me about how it was just so nice they were able to work with each other. Because they both lived in places in LA where like they loved their friends, but they just didn't have any interactions with any Black women. And they were just like, this is so nice. Like you could feel them light up when we all got like in a group thing together, and you just like realize how much that matters.
I mean, it's so, I hate it. I hate the fact that like with this whole DEI thing, like I just remember feeling 5 years ago, I'm like, this is going to be bullshit. And I think I was like, in like 5 years, this isn't going to mean anything. I'm like, everyone's just, that's why like, and it's hard because these companies, and I know that like not all of them, like sometimes I'll say white people, but sometimes I'm also just referring to like the system or like these privileged entities at
large. Like mainstream corporate culture.
Yeah. But what's frustrating is that they'll go and be like, oh, I'm doing all of this and I'm doing all of that. We're changing Aunt Jemima and we're going to make all different colored Band-Aids. And there are Black people who are just like, I don't give a shit. Like, fuck you. I know that this is just you. This is vanity. And they'll get mad as if like, you're not going to prove me right in 5 years.
Yep.
And so to be here now and to see all of these people backpedaling, it's like, why don't you think people don't trust you? Like, this is so, no one's surprised. Right. I love that people are like, oh, my jaw is exactly in place. Like, it's not on the floor. It is exactly in place because this was to be expected. This is why when y'all do this shit, nobody trusts you.
Right.
And so, then tying that into like interracial friendships, like I just think that it's so important that like if you are going to be friends with someone that's outside of your community, like you got to stand on business. Like you have to be somebody that like is willing to feel it out. And if you know that you're not, then just be honest and like, don't fuck with me.
Right.
I just feel like we're at a place now where I'm just like, if you don't think that you can handle it, if you don't think that you can try and work through the fact that you might fuck up or you likely will. And that like, it's going to be labor, but it's going to be labor on both of our parts. Like, if you can't do that, then like, just go on with your white friends and do what you do. Like,
Yeah, I think the fucking up thing is a really important. Well, I think I've told you stories before of like where I've like fucked up, but I remember like the more recent one. It wasn't actually that recent now because time is going by way too fast. But I remember telling Vanessa, who's a Black friend of ours, that I was casually on a dating app. And I just felt just comfortable saying this, and I should have given it more preface. I said something like, man, I just don't trust when these Black guys swipe on me. And like what I meant was that I am wary of the like Black men on dating apps, because this has actually happened to me, where they compliment me within the first like 5 minutes that I am not like a Black woman, or these men that are seeking white women out because they are trying to like hurt Black women. And it's like they're very transparent about it. They don't try to hide it. And it's almost used as like a compliment to you. And it's just disgusting. And I just hate it. And I don't like it. And I can like just feel the anger of their mothers already. And I can like, and I would be like, you get a minute like sense of just like, I feel you. Like I can feel your sister hating this and I feel her on this. Like I'm already mad, So I just like, don't even want to touch it. And it's like, that is a lot more context than just saying, I am suspicious of these like Black guys in my dating. You know what I mean? So I remember Vanessa being like, what's that? Like, she just, she didn't like jump at me, but she was just like, and then I had to kind of like explain it. But I was like, yeah, I could have said that like out loud. Cause her girl was there. It was like a girl she was dating and they both were and I was like, okay, I need to, that could have come out better. Let me explain. Like, like, yeah, you fuck up sometimes. Like you just have to be careful of what I know that I don't need to overly explain that one because I know you get that one and I've expressed that too. But yeah, you're like, you have to be able to be like, I fucked up on that. That could have been expressed better. Like,
yeah.
And I think the being comfortable with like, I will fuck up is, you have to have that.
Yeah. And because it's like, I also think that there are a lot of white people who are just like, well, why won't you trust me? Like, I would have voted for Obama for a third time. And it's just kind of like, it's not personal, and it's not, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, it's not personal, but it's just kind of like, again, it goes back to this, it's a cycle of people showboating to get the trust. But it's actually not about what they're doing. So it wasn't about them genuinely wanting to change Aunt Jemima. It's because they thought that they could make more money if they did change it. And so that is why Black people are hesitant. Like, it's truly not personal. It's actually really about safety and survival. And I think that the more people understand that, like, it's like, that's what's hard. There's like fear on both sides, right? But for me personally, I feel like the fear is justified on one side and it's not really justified on the other.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Like, I remember visiting my mom's friend in South Carolina. He was a doctor, and my mom retelling a story or like a memory that she had of when they both were trying to go somewhere on like a campus in South Carolina, and there was some like horrible racist thing happened or something. And he quickly responded by being like, well, I'd like to remind you that the Black students didn't want to talk to us either, or something like that. And it was just like, but dude, that's not the same. Like, my mom's talking about us. You mean in 1980, the Black students didn't want to talk to the white students at a university in South Carolina? I'm shocked. Like, you just like, you're like, it's just not the same. So yeah, I feel you. Do you think that there's anything that you've learned? Like, if anyone's like listening and they're like trying to navigate an interracial friendship, like from your perspective, do you think there's anything you've learned? I know, for example, with your thing in grad school, it's just like you don't owe anybody your patience.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't owe a white woman your patience or your whatever. Like, I feel like that's one to take home.
It's so interesting. I will say that I think that I think about, my mom said the quintessential phrase of like, basically like, watch out for the white friends that you make growing up. Mm-hmm. And I think that there was a part of me that wanted to be like, Mom, like, come on. And then as I really experienced, because I didn't really experience whiteness until I went to boarding school. Like, I grew up with white girls, but again, these were white girls that were largely around Black people for the most part.
Right.
So it was different.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
how old were you, Day, by the way, when your mom told you that?
So it's probably anywhere between like 10 and 13.
Okay.
Yeah, somewhere in there. And it's hard, right? Because I don't think what a lot of white people understand is that like there are so many Black people that want to prove when they're confronted with that kind of information, they want to prove it wrong.
Right.
I think that that's what a lot of white people don't understand is that they want to believe that racism is over and that you will see me for the content of my character and not just my skin and all of that stuff. But yeah, I just, and then I had weird interactions in boarding school with white people, and I was just like,
what do you have an example?
Yeah, and it's, I feel bad bringing this up because the person who said it, she has really evolved since then.
Yeah.
But, I used to support her at her soccer games. She's a white female friend.
Yep.
And again, I'm just me. So I'm just like, yes, girl, like, woo, woo. Like, I'm out there and doing all that. And so I think she had family visiting, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, is your family going to be out here like supporting you or whatever? And she was like, oh my God, no, they're not ghetto. And I was just like,
for those of you who just have the audio of this, Daisha threw her head back in laughter, and it is just something else.
I just remember it will always, because I was so taken aback when she said, like, I was like, oh, so that's how you see me. I'm your little ghetto Black friend on the sidelines.
Oh my God.
And
like as we should mention, like, I'm pretty sure I know who said that, and like they're a wonderful they're a wonderful dearest friend, but like people evolve.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Right. We were like 13, 14 when she said this. And again, if you are, I can understand.
I told a Nigerian in my middle school that they weren't really black. Like when I was like 11. So like people evolve.
Yeah, like, and it's one of those things where I'm like, if you have a certain image of a black person and that's all
Mhm.
you've ever experienced, and then next to that image, people are always saying it's ghetto, it's this, it's that.
Right.
And then, I understand why she said it. And it would be a different story if she hadn't evolved as a person, right?
Right.
But these are those incidents that woman was talking about, where she was like, you will have done so much labor here that people will have to do later in life.
Yep.
And that's why you'll be able to get ahead.
Yep.
And, I feel that. I understand that. Because now it's like, if somebody had said that to me in like college, or even now, like I'd look at them funny, and then I'd be like, but like,
Right.
I would know, it wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't throw me off my feet.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I've already went through that. I went through the
Right.
shock and awe.
Right. It's sad to think. I think that like so much of what talking about this today, it's like so much of what we realized is that like it's early exposure to uncomfortable conversations and things that might make younger white kids uncomfortable. And if there's anything like taken from this, it's that like I said, like I think I'm also just partly just it's just also just who I am. I just think I'm a naturally inquisitive person. I think there's a lot of other things, but I do think a big part of it was just that like these really uncomfortable conversations really young, and just this like being aware of it. And then you get these it helps play into these friendships that you and I are now enjoying today. And it like, yeah, maybe we cut this. I'm not trying to end it on a dark note, but I can't help but be saddened by the fact that it's like through this really important reflective conversation of how did we get something that was so beautiful, it's like it is largely in part due to things that are actively we're trying to not talk to young kids about now. And that is just really upsetting.
But I think like to keep it on a positive note.
Yes, thank you. Bring it back to the positive. Thank you.
No, but I think that like this conversation just goes to show why that's so important, and like why we shouldn't shy away from it, and why like we can't let the canceling of DEI or affirmative action or whatever it is stop us from still trying to have those conversations and those interactions.
Yep.
Because they do so much good. But I also think at the same time, I always think about how I did this presentation for my high school. I went back and I taught about this idea of Black patience. And I used a TED Talk that features this Black man who talks about his journey of becoming best friends with the Grand Dragon or Wizard or whatever the top role is in the KKK.
Yep.
And how like he basically, it was through his curiosity of like, why does this man hate me, that he was able to get this man to recognize that like his hate was stupid, and he left the KKK. But like that took a lot of patience. And what's hard is that white people will weaponize that patience against Black people and say that like, why can't you be patient like this guy? Why can't do you see how much good that this guy brought from his patience? And I'm just like, that shouldn't be the message. Because there's a part of me that wants to say that I'm like, that both parties need to have a level of tolerance for the fact that people are going to get it wrong. Mm-hmm. But I also want to be clear that for me, like, I do think that there needs to be a greater, white people are just going to have to do more work. Yeah. And I think that you kind of have to be comfortable with the fact that you're going to have to do more work. Yeah. But it's, again, I'm like, talk to your ancestors about that. Like, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like for any like white person listening who is maybe like, how do I not get so noticeably weird and uncomfortable in like Black spaces with Black conversations happening? A thing that I had told a friend of mine a while back, and she got back to me and said that it was actually helpful, was I sometimes, like this is for any white girl listening right now, I find it really helpful to seek out, I wouldn't say the most angry voices, but like I did this more during like the George Floyd time, but like I'll still do it today. Like one of the reasons why like I mentioned Michael Harriot, for example, is like there are a collection of like Black journalists that I really respect that will often have like a very strong anger towards white people. And I think what you listen to when you read people like him is you're listening to, he's talking to Black people, and it's like you're getting to hear how Black people are probably talking to each other when like a white person's not in the room. And it doesn't necessarily, I don't know, it's like you don't need to internalize all of that anger. You don't need to like let it burden you and ruin your day. But it's weird. It was a weird practice that I started doing around the George Floyd time, where I would seek out some of the most angry people and just read a little bit of their words like every day, just to like acclimate to it. And I'm not seeking out people who are like directly insulting me. And it's different from like the self-flagellation, it's like the self-flagellation. That's what's called, right?
Yeah.
It's different than that. It's just exposing, it's like exposure therapy. It's just exposing yourself to the fact that like there is a very large body of people all around you who speak a certain way about a certain truth and feel a certain thing, and they're not talking about it when likely you're around. But there's going to be a time in which maybe the conversation does go that way. And like, if you want to be like a better friend and a better like functioning human being, you'd probably be best to not be just thrown off guard and like just be like, wait, you think that? You have animosity towards that? That's white people can be annoying in these spaces. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's good. It's like, and I can't stress enough the nuance in what I'm saying, because it's not like just go seek out feeling like victimized every day or something, like it's truly, that's not what I'm saying. But I really do feel like it is just, that's not the only reason why I read Black publications, truly. But I do think that there's a helpful part of it, which is that like, you just get comfortable with being like, yeah, people are really angry about a lot of stuff. And just the more you like let yourself like read it, you just, then it doesn't mean you have to accept all of it, but it just helps you not be so reactive. And it's just like, because it's a reality. So I don't know. I don't know if I expressed that well again, but I think, yeah.
I thought that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
that's you know how we close out? We do a scroll, double tap, DM.
Yeah.
And so I thought it would be fitting to do interracial friends in pop culture.
Yeah.
So we have Meredith and Christina from Grey's Anatomy, Angelica and Susie from the Rugrats, and Cher and Dion from Clueless.
Oh my God. Wait, who were the first ones?
Christina and Meredith on Grey's Anatomy.
Okay, so I'd have to scroll because I'm not as familiar with them.
Okay.
And then I'd have to, oh my God, it's so tough. Wait, then who are the middle ones?
So it's Susie and Angelica from the Rugrats.
Susie and Angelica is killing me.
I know.
I mean, maybe I'd have to DM Susie and Angelica and then double tap Cher and Dion.
Oh my gosh. Why are we twins?
Really? Is that what you would do too?
Yeah.
That's so funny. Wait, can I ask, why would you do it? Because for me, it was just because like Stacey Dash, I don't know where she went.
I know. Although, okay, so when I was lining them up, I was a little bit torn about between Susie and Angelica and Cher and Dion, because someone was bringing up how, like, what was so great about their friendship in Clueless is that they were equals and that they were both wealthy, they were both desirable.
True.
And, like, it was never like Dion was just like her sidekick. Like,
Dion had her own fucking thing going on. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked that Dion had very much of her own world, very much outside of Cher.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did like that.
Yeah, so I respected that. But I'm a 90s kid, grew up on the Rugrats, grew up on Susie and Angelica's dynamic, and I love that Susie had no time for Angelica's games. I identify with both of them because Angelica was a very, like, when you think, like, yes, she was a brat sometimes, but she was just also a very, like, what's the word? She wanted what she wanted. She was an ambitious girl. And so I really identified with her ambition, but I also identified with Susie's, like, I ain't got time for this.
Wait, I need to quickly look them up again. I want the visual.
Becky, this was an amazing, enlightening conversation. Again, you are doing the Lord's work for all of the Beckys out there. The white women named Becky, really rehabbing that PR.
God, it's too funny.
Where can the people find you? Do they still need to send a pigeon, a note on a pigeon?
They need to send a pigeon. One day they won't need to send a pigeon, but right now they still need to send a pigeon.
Okay.
Yeah.
I swear, don't y'all just love when Becky is on the podcast? Like, every time she's on, we always have such an amazing, insightful conversation, and I just cannot wait to have her on again. But if you could not get enough of our dynamic, I highly recommend checking out our Patreon show, On the Couch, where we talk about everything going on in our lives and the world. Just like you're one of our besties flopping on the couch with us. So please definitely check it out. It is a Patreon exclusive. Also, if you loved this episode or had questions or things you wanted to add to our conversation, make sure you leave us a comment wherever you are listening. You can also screenshot the episode and tag me on social media. You can tag Becky on a pigeon. You can tag us and share your thoughts, or you can join the Real Talk Friend Therapy Facebook group and Patreon to engage with us there. All right, besties, I'll catch you later. Your girl is out. Loving Real Talk Friend Therapy? Of course you are. So don't forget to show us some love with a 5-star review wherever you are listening, and to join our Patreon to unlock bonus recordings, videos, private chats, and more.